Good day, Year 9, and welcome back to Lesson 5. You can see a slight change for our title, Refining Writing Skills today. Okay, and really, we're not writing, we're helping people to imagine something new. We're being challenged to use writing as a way to help others imagine something new. And that's the beauty of writing. Now, we're still underpinning that with this concept of how do we become better writers. And we're looking today at this idea of structuring ideas, controlling how we write and what we're writing, the order of ideas and how they develop. And we're going to go straight into a recap and retrieval quiz then, just to help with that process, just to anchor us back into today's learning. So I'm going to read through. I will pause after each question. You can write your answer, or you can pause the screen if you need more time. So, number 1, what P describes a sweeping description of place? What P describes a sweeping description of place? So you can just write down number 1 and your answer. Okay, number 2. Is the following sentence a question, exclamation, command, or statement? Is the following sentence a question, exclamation, command, or statement? Holcombe 2 can be seen from great distances. Okay, number 3. Can you rewrite this question as a command? So can you rewrite the question, can you open the window, as if it's a command? Brilliant. Now in number 4, can you underline if you print out the work? If not, you can just write the appositive down. The appositive in the sentence. The teacher, a curious and intelligent woman, smiled at the class. So in number 4, can you just write down or underline the appositive, please? And number 5, can you rewrite this sentence so that the subordinating conjunction is moved to the beginning? So we're going to restructure this sentence. So really the sentence is beginning with the subordinate element. Okay, we went back to class after lunch. And you can see typing errors, so I do apologize. We went back to class after lunch. So you need to pause there and then we'll look at the answers together. Okay, let's look at the answers together. So what P describes a sweeping description of place? Give yourself a tick if you put down panoramic. That was the new word we introduced yesterday, to give a panoramic description of a place. Now, is the following sentence a question, exclamation, command, or statement? Holcombe 2 can be seen from great distances, but why is it a statement, guys? So, yep, if you got that right, brilliant. If it was a guess and you got it right, luck's on your side, but if not, let's just have a little look. So we quickly zoom in at the end and it ends in a full stop. So it cannot be a question, no question mark. It cannot be an exclamation, no exclamation mark. So then we look at the beginning of the sentence and we see that it begins with a place. Holcombe, it doesn't begin with a verb, which a command does. A verb is a signifier of a command that's telling us what to do. So we have a statement. Brilliant. Now, if we look at number 3, I've just got rid of the question. So we start with the question. How do we rewrite the question as a command? So that was a challenging one, but if you've got it so it looks like this, brilliant. Open the window. So actually, I wanted to do this to show you that questions can often be used to create a sense of choice. They often are hedges. They soften a command. Can you please open the window versus open the window? We're really directing the person to do the same thing, but a question softens it, makes it less like a sense that you're being told what to do, that you have a choice, whereas a command is much more directive. Open the window. Now we can see it begins with the open, which is the verb, and it ends in a full stop. So that's our question rewritten as a command. Right, did you get this one? Underline the appositive, a curious and intelligent woman. Aren't teachers such? So let's double check. The teacher smiled at the class. We get rid of the appositive. The sentence still makes sense. Now, it doesn't begin with a who or a that. Brilliant. A curious and intelligent woman smiled at the class also works. It makes sense. Brilliant. So that one is right. Now, rewrite this sentence so that the subordinating conjunction is moved to the beginning. We went back to class after lunch becomes after lunch we went back to class. Brilliant. Now, this is just to show sometimes with variation, using subordinating clauses in different positions creates variety. Okay, and just a mental note in terms of the use of commas. After lunch, comma, we went back to the class. So if the bit of the sentence, the subordinate element that tells us when or where something's happening is at the start of the sentence, we use the comma to separate it. Brilliant, guys. So give yourself a mark out of 5. Very good start for the day. Now, I must be honest, okay? I think it's really important to be honest. And yes, I am a curious and intelligent teacher, but I'm also not 100% perfect. I did get some messages from people about the last activity in our last lesson. So I'm really sorry if I didn't make it clear exactly what I wanted from you. What I've done to compensate is in our last lesson this week, the activity is shorter to give you actually time within the hour to do the final written draft, to give you time to fix any paragraphs or any bit of the writing that was not clear. So I am really sorry if I wasn't clear. It's very hard sometimes when you're learning this way. You think to the audience of one, you're sat at your kitchen table, that you're being really clear, and then people feedback, and you just know that maybe you need to be in the next lesson more explicit, more obvious. So please do feedback to me, guys, if what I'm asking you isn't clear. That's the only way I can learn, is to get a little bit of response from you. Okay, so in theory, what I was hoping would have happened is that we've been on our writing journey so far, that we began with this idea that we're using images to inspire a piece of description. Coming alongside that, we were looking at a very famous book, or an extract from a very famous book called In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, that's also inspiring our writing. So we are being inspired to write in response to an image, but also an example of somebody else's writing. And we did some work last week in the run up to this piece of writing to generate ideas that hopefully would have translated into you writing paragraph number 1, which should have been a panoramic description of the landscape. In other words, what you could see in your chosen picture. It only needed to be about 4 to 5 sentences long, and we'd done activities that were designed to get us thinking creatively about our images. So I know from the work that I'd been sent, in the run up to some of you saying we didn't quite make it to the last task, we weren't quite sure what it was, that you've done the prep work. You just need to write 4 to 5 sentences that offer a panoramic description of the landscape of your picture. Okay, using some of those techniques from last week, some are positives, using a subordinate conjunction in different sentence types. So here is my panoramic description of the landscape. And you'll be able to imagine which picture this relates to, hopefully by the time I'm finished reading it to you. Can you, sorry, I don't know why I did that strange intonation on can you imagine the vast, inexplicable loneliness of the Kansas Sweet Plains? Tick, tick, I'm using a sentence type. Whilst walking, your eye widens in awe as it absorbs the expanse of the sky, a starch blue blanket tucked in tight against the horizon. So I'm describing the landscape. In other words, I'm saying what I can see. I've used my appositive, a starch blue blanket tucked in. I am trying to think consciously about my vocabulary and my description so I can really help you to imagine this picture. As this hard blue horizon, a line that separates the heavens and the earth, melts to gold, the wheat, a swathe of golden cereal, begins to ripple like the sea. So I'm describing one of the images. Now, I nicked the idea of a hard blue sky from the Truman Capote piece of writing. So again, you can use his writing to inspire your own. And I've now described the sky and the wheat. As the sea of wheat impregnates the air with the scent of summer, it threatens to drown out all other life. Now, I've gone creatively down my own route. I've got an extended metaphor coming through of the sea. Okay, now we didn't look explicitly at that, but your challenge with descriptive writing is always bring to the table what you know and what you do well. Okay, so it threatens to drown out life until a house, a worn and weathered building appears like a boat cast adrift. So we've got a panoramic description of the picture with the little house in the middle of it. Okay, so if I was not clear, there will be time for you to rebuild or to return to this paragraph and make sure you have a panoramic description of the opening. But I don't want you to worry about what we haven't done today. We're going to move on into today's learning. So we're going to think about how we structure ideas. Okay, and we're just going to have a quick checkpoint. All right, my lovelies. So we're really looking to create a 3-paragraph description of our chosen images following the style of Cold Blood, of Truman Capote's piece of writing. So we've done paragraph 1, tick. panoramic description. So what we're going to look at for the rest of this week is how do we build these other two paragraphs. Okay, now a little recap here that paragraphs are always used by writers to organize information and ideas. That's where this idea of structuring and control comes from. That's what's going to make us good writers. Good writers structure their ideas, they control them. Now, one of the things we often get feedback-wise from students is they don't want to be controlled or structured. They just want to be creative. They just want the ideas to flow. Sometimes it's exactly the same when you start with an idea. It kind of takes over, you lose control and structure. But we're going to be really intentional. We're intending to structure our ideas in a very particular way. Now, this is one of the benefits of using an example of existing writing. It shows us the structure that really we're going to imitate, that we're going to copy. So all paragraphs in any type of writing are about organization. And it's really important to be organized. Why? Because writing is kind of like inviting a reader inside the contents of your head. And if the contents of your head are not brought into an organized, controlled fashion, the likelihood is they're not going to understand, they're going to get lost, they're not going to enjoy the experience of your writing. And we want people to enjoy what we write, particularly when we're being descriptive. We want them to be engaged, we want them to be entertained, we want them to be challenged, and organization is a part of that. Okay, so paragraphs are used to organize, number one. Paragraphs also are about focus. A paragraph will always focus the reader on what the writer wants to bring to their attention. A paragraph is the equivalent of a moment where somebody will say, look at this, look here, I want you to think about this, notice how. So paragraphs are about organizing and focusing the readers. They are also a way to guide the reader. So actually, if you're writing an extended response, now this can be both descriptive, persuasive, argumentative, the different types of writing you might be asked to do at GCSE, you need to guide the reader. You need to take them through on a journey through your ideas. And again, we don't want them getting lost, confused, losing their way. So paragraphs are a way to guide the reader. In theory, then, organizing the ideas, focusing the reader and guiding them through. And readers don't want to get bored, so you can be creative in this process. So sometimes you can shift attention to different things, as well as changing the reader's point of view by zooming in and out on different details. So we've already said that the Capote description begins with this panoramic, all-encompassing, sweeping description of the landscape. So we're going to look at what he does in paragraph 2 today. Okay, so he begins to zoom in to describe the village of Holkham in more detail. So he starts big and panoramic, and now he is zooming in. So to test this, or to check our understanding of this, I'm going to ask you just to do some reading responses for me. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this paragraph, and it says here, list 4 things you learn about the village of Holkham. All the answers are in this paragraph, okay? You're not getting the information from anywhere else, okay? So as I read it to you, you can already be mentally thinking, oh, that's telling me something about Holkham, that's telling me. And you want 4 things. Now, there might be more than 4, but you're going to go for 4, okay? So Holkham, too, can be seen from great distances. Not that there is much to see. Simply an aimless congregation of buildings divided in the centre by the mainline tracks of Santa Fe Railroad. A haphazard hamlet bounded on the south by a stretch of the Arkansas, pronounced Arkansas River on the north by a highway, Route 50, and on the east and west by prairie lands and wheat fields. After rain or when snow falls thaw, the streets, unnamed, unshaded, unpaved, turn from the thickest dust into the direst mud. At one end of the town stands a stark old stucco structure, the roof of which supports an electric sign, Dance. But the dancing has ceased and the advertisement has been dark for several years. Nearby is another building with an irrelevant sign, this one in flaking gold on a dirty window, Holkham Bank. The bank closed in 1933 and its former counting rooms have been converted into apartments. It's one of the town's 2 apartment houses, the second being a ramshackle mansion. Known, because a good part of the local school's faculty live there, is the teacherage, but the majority of Holkham's homes are 1-story frame affairs with front porches. Okay, so this is what we called a zoomed in detailed description of a place in more detail. Now, writers don't always have to choose to zoom in on places. This is important for us because of the images we're using. You can zoom in on an object, you can zoom in on a character, you can zoom in on a thing. It doesn't have to be a village as such. But what we see in this paragraph is how you can say a lot of detail. Okay, so I want you just to tell me 4 things you learn about the village of Holcombe. Okay, so you're going to pause and you're going to write down 4 things you learn about the village of Holcombe. So I'll just give you a freebie to get you started. The village of Holcombe is seen from great distances. The village of Holcombe has a mainline track, a railway going through it. So pause and write down the 4 things that you learn about Holcombe. Now, as we go through the answers for this, there is room for variation because there's more we learn in this paragraph. These are just 4 examples. If you've got similar ones, you can give them a tick. But really, as we look at these answers, as long as you can say, there it is in the paragraph that's telling me something about Holcombe, you can give yourself a tick. So the village of Holcombe is seen from great distances. Brilliant. The village of Holcombe is an aimless congregation of buildings. What a beautiful image, aimless congregation. It's like a meeting of aimless buildings, aimless, without purpose. This is a town that is definitely kind of like devoid of purpose and care. It's aimless, it's a bit lost, it's kind of lost its way. Okay, number 3. The village of Holcombe is divided by a railway road. So I'm just reading on through. We've got the buildings, then we learn that there's a railway road that goes through the middle. Okay, the centre by the main line tracks. Okay, brilliant. And the village of Holcombe is a hamlet. So here we go, a haphazard hamlet, bounded on the south by a brown stretch of river. So you could have done different details, that the village of Holcombe has a river to the south, that it has a highway to the north, prairie lands and wheat fields to the east and west, that it snows there, rains there. So actually there is potential for more. But what we're really seeing is that we're learning things about this village based on what we read. Okay? That's going to help us when we plan our own writing. Now, this time I've got 8 statements. I want you to decide whether it's true or false. Now, guys, I appreciate this is our reading skill, so you don't have to write the whole statements out. So for number 1, you could just write true or false into your book, okay? And we'll look at those answers together again in a minute. So number 1, the mainline tracks of the Santa Fe Railroad run through the centre. Is that true or false? Number 2, the Route 50 highway is to the south. Is that true or false? Number 3, it never rains or snows. Is that true or false? Number 4, there is an electric sign for a dance. True or false? Number 5, the other sign is for Holcombe Bank. Number 6, the bank opened in 1933. Number 7, many of the town's teachers live in an old mansion. And number 8, none of the homes are 1-story with front porches. So guys, again, press pause, make your decisions, and we'll come back and look at our answers together in a minute. Okay, so let's have a look. The mainline tracks of Santa Fe Railroad run through the centre. That is true. That's the false. That is true. Tells us it's divided in the centre by the mainline tracks of the Santa Fe Railroad. So it's explicit. We can double check that quite easily. Okay, number 2, the Route 50 highway is to the south. Now that's false because it's to the north. There you go, on the north by a highway, Route 50. Okay, so that's to the north. It never rains or snows. It's false. After rain or when snow falls thaw. So we do get rain and snow here. We also get the hot summers, which is what causes the wheat to grow. So we're learning that the Kansas wheat plains are kind of like quite driven by different types of weather. Okay, so then we go to number 4. There is an electric sign for a dance. Yep, look at that. They use capitals to show. Now it's an electric sign. It says dance. There isn't actually a dancer anymore, but the sign has stayed. So again, feeding into this idea of a place that's neglected. Okay, let's have a look then. The other sign is for Holcombe Bank. Yep, there we go. So we've got the 2 signs in capitals. But again, it's in flaking gold. It's irrelevant. It's on a dirty window. So tying in with this overall sense that this is a place that is neglected and uncared for. Brilliant. So again, if you've got that one right, give yourself a tick. Now, the bank opened in 1933. Now, guys, if you were skimming this too quickly, you might have said true because you can see 1993 stands out. But actually, the bank closed in 1933. Okay, so the bank didn't open, it closed. So that one is false. Many of the town's teachers live in an old mansion. Now, this is true. Now, this is a little bit more now inference. It's not explicitly stated, but we can work it out from this one. It is one of the town's 2 apartment houses, the second being a ramshackle mansion, tick, a mansion, because a good part of the local school's faculty lives there. So faculty is an old-fashioned word for teachers at the teacherage. So we can work that one's true. We have to work it out though. So if you got that one, brilliant. Number 8, none of the homes are 1-story with front porches. That's false because the majority are. So guys, just check your answers. If you were wrong on any of them, just fix it. Just change it to true or false now and make sure you understand why. Okay, so little bit of a language checkpoint that might help us with our writing today. Adjectives. Okay, guys, so adjectives, these are words that modify and describe the noun. Adjectives can tell us what the noun is like and can create a particular impression and atmosphere. Now, in this paragraph, Capote uses a beautiful selection of adjectives. They're really evocative. They really help us to imagine what this town is like. I've just listed some here for you. Aimless, haphazard, unnamed, unshaded, unpaved, irrelevant, flaky, dirty, ramshackle. Beautiful word choices. But what do these word choices tell us about the atmosphere of the village? All I want you to do is to choose one answer from the list below, but have a reason for your choice. So do these adjective choices help you to imagine that the village is well cared for, that the village is affluent and thriving, that the village is neglected, that the village is in a rundown and in a state of despair? So which do you think is the best answer based on the words aimless, haphazard, unnamed, unshaded, unpaved, irrelevant, flaking, dirty, ramshackle? But I would love you to give me a because in your answer. Yeah, so you might say the atmosphere of the village is well cared for because, and then you're just going to complete that sentence for me, okay? So just pause. Again, give yourself a couple of minutes just to have a look at those words again. This might be a good point if there's any words here that you don't know, that you look them up. And then you make your choice. So we're all going to begin. The village is, so you're going to choose which of those 4 is the best answer, and then a because. Right, guys, which did you go for? Hopefully not well cared for, affluent, or thriving. Those are the non-examples. Affluent means that it's got a lot of money. If you had to look that word up, affluent's a lovely word. It suggests money. It's like a materially wealthy place. This is not an affluent place, and it's not thriving. Thriving means full of life and well cared for, looked after. So we can immediately not even need to worry about those 2. Now, to be honest, you could have gone 50-50 here. You could have said the village is neglected. Okay, why? The village is neglected because the writer uses the adjectives dirty and flaking to show that it's been unkempt, it's not looked after. Flaking paint, that it's not been repaired, it's not being touched up, it's not being improved. So you could have gone for that one. You could have just decided that you preferred this phrasing, that the village is run down, and I love this, a state of despair, because the use of the words aimless, the use of the adjective aimless suggests that it's a pointless place. Haphazard suggests that it's just all in a mess all over the place, that there's no order or organization or purpose to this place. So there is potential there for choice. Now, through that process of reading, we're tooling ourselves up to do some writing. When we think about writing in a minute, we're going to be thinking about adjectives, helping to create a feel, helping to imagine, or helping our reader to imagine what a place is like. Okay, so as I said, the village is neglected, is run down in a state of repair. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to write our second paragraph today. Okay, so we've got our panoramic description of the landscape. Oh, I'm in a wheat field. Oh, I can see blue sky. But now we're going to use our next paragraph to zoom in to describe a new element. But this element is of our chosen pictures. So this is where we kind of part ways with Truman Capote. Truman Capote zooms in to describe the village. We don't have in any of our pictures a village. So we're going to be looking at a new element of our chosen pictures. But we are going to write 5 sentences. We're going to write sentence 1 to introduce the object or element of the picture that we're zooming in on for our description. We're going to write a sentence number 2, to describe what we see in detail. We're going to use sentence 3 to think about how something can be changed. So how weather or the season or the use of something can cause it to change. We're going to write a 4th sentence where we describe one aspect in even more detail, and a 5th sentence where we describe another aspect of the object in more detail. Now, all of this will make more sense when I show you for the objects what we're zooming in on. Now, are you ready? We'll come back to that in a minute. So for our next paragraph, you might zoom in on this bad boy. So if you'd chosen this picture in the starting place, this is what you're zooming in on. You are going to describe the thresher. So it says here, if you wanted, this could become the first paragraph, sorry, the first sentence of your paragraph. The thresher too can be heard from great distances. So that's my sentence number 1. I've made it really clear. I'm about to describe the thresher. So for sentence number 2, I've got to describe what I can see. Now, guys, how you plan, or the amount of planning you need to do at this point is going to be up to you. Because okay, if I'm describing what I can see there, right, it's green, it's got red on it. The windows at the front look like eyes. It's kind of like almost spraying up dust. It's spraying up residue from the wheat. It's kind of like creating its own storm cloud, its own cloud of wheat and grain. It seems to have a metal threshing and tearing component at the back. It seems to have this green tube. So I'm starting to describe what I can see. So the thresher too can be heard from great distances. Okay, now I've said heard there because it doesn't always have to be exactly the same as the capote one. So the thresher too can be heard from great distances, or the thresher too can be seen from great distances. A green metal monster. So now I'm thinking about sentence number 2. I want to describe what I can see. A green metal monster that rips and tears its way through the wheat corn. 2 windows like eyes stay fixed focus as it moves with steady purpose. So my sentence 2 is describe what I can see. Okay, so say what you can see for this image. Now, sentence 3 says, how does this machine maybe change during weather or seasons or use? So if it's really noisy when it's being used, okay, it's creating the sound of machinery. We can hear the sound of the turbines churning. We can hear the sound of breaking wheat. We can hear the sound of a heavy throttle and engine. How could that change when it's not being used? What's the opposite of noise? Silence. So you could say something like, after the harvest, it falls into a state of silence. So you could start for sentence 3 to think about how it changes. So how is this object going to be different at the end of the harvest? So maybe it's going to be covered in dust and dirt. Maybe at the end of the season, it's going to be worn out and exhausted. It's going to be choking on its own engine fumes. So the thresher too can be heard from great distances. That's my sentence number 1. Sentence number 2, I've got to describe what I can see and hear and experience, what I can imagine. The thresher too can be heard from great distances. The sound of a hungry engine churning through the wheat fields brings this green metal monster to life. So now I've described what I can see and what I can hear, and I'm always looking and focused on this picture. Number 3, how does that object, that place change due to weather or season? Yep, in the height of summer, before harvest, the machine stands silent and still. But when September comes, it roars into life. So there's my sentence 3, how it's changing due to the weather. Now, sentence 4 and 5, now describing elements in more detail. So I could zoom in to describe the front of the machine, and then I could describe the back. I could describe this strange kind of like little window that I can see at the front. I could describe the churning blades of the cutting element at the back. Now, to be honest, for sentence 4 and 5, you're going to have to use your imagination if you're choosing this picture. I don't know the technical term for the blades at the back of this thresher, but I know that they turn and they will be what's cutting down the wheat. So you could do a sentence for number 4 describing the blades, how they cut, and that they're sharp and shiny and metallic, and that they cut through. For sentence number 5, you could, at the front of the machine, 2 windows like eyes. You could describe the 2 windows. So if that's your image, you don't need to go any further because you just start to write now. Or you can listen to the other ones if you want more ideas. So you might have chosen this picture. Now, this picture, if you remember, was the grain elevators. This might be the picture you're describing. So you're going to go through the same process. We want 5 sentences that really zoom in and describe this place, these grain elevators, in detail. So you can still use the same starting point. The grain elevators too can be seen from great distances. That's sentence number 1. Boom. Now, sentence number 2, what can we see? Oh, so how would you describe this? What can we see? So they're silver, they're cylinders, they're cylindrical. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 smaller cylinders at the front, which seem to be joined by a big metal tube. Behind them, we've got 2 bigger cylinders. And then at the back, what seems to be like an emerging tower. So when you're doing the sentence 2, describe what we see, there's huge potential here for detail. Try and think about the texture. So it's almost like a good word here is like almost like corrugated. So where you've got like this ripply metal effect. So you could say, 5 cylinders made of corrugated aluminium, are at the forefront of this building. Behind them, 2 bigger cylinders emerge above the skyline, overwatched by a tall tower in the background. So you're describing what you can see. Now, how can these objects, these places change due to weather, season, or use? So for all of our images, really, we're thinking about during harvesting season and out of harvesting season. So during the season, when everything's being harvested, can you remember what these elevators are used to make? Brilliant, they're used to make flour, but they're not going to be making flour all year. So maybe, remember, what's the key point? This is why we started September. So like we said, so we're thinking about change. So maybe out of season before the end of the summer, before mid-September when the harvest season begins, these grain elevators, we could say, are silent. So a bit like the threshing machines, they're silent, they're not being used, they just stand ready. However, after harvest season, the sound of the machinery working to change wheat into flour is all that can be heard. So remember, guys, listen, each of these ideas is only a sentence. So we're just getting you to look at these images, to think about a couple of sentences at most, all right? So we have our sentence. The grain elevators too can be seen from great distances. Metal cylindrical giants that stand tall on the landscape. However, before harvesting begins, they are silent, dormant, and asleep. After harvest, they awaken, and the sounds of the churning machines can be heard all night. So then for sentence 4 and 5, what elements of those machines are you going to zoom in on? So you might decide to zoom in to describe the 5 cylinders at the front in more detail and then the tower at the back. Now, again, I don't really know anything about grain elevators. Shock horror. I'm going to use my imagination. So maybe, in the tower behind, there's a stack. It's like a giant chimney, maybe, that one in the background there. So in the rectangular kind of looking part of the grain elevator. Now, I'm assuming an elevator is what makes things go up and down. So maybe I might want to just imagine describing that in the 2 big cylinders there, that's where all the wheat's getting crushed and turned into flour. And it's churning and moving the wheat through the machinery and creating that fine white powder, to describe something in more detail. I am making it up. Shock horror. I'm using my imagination. I love it. So that could be. Now, again, if this is your image, you don't need to go any further unless you want to. You're happy that I've talked you through, you know what you need to do for your 5 sentences, so be it. Or you might just want to hear the last 2 examples. So, guys, you might be holding out for this one. Now, just to show you that you don't always have to use exactly the same sentence starters as the Truman Capote, the weathered and warm building cannot be seen from great distances, but suddenly rises from above the sea of wheat. Cha-ching, there's my sentence number 1, introducing the object or place that I'm zooming in on for my next paragraph, my paragraph number 2. So sentence number 2, say what we see. So I've got to describe what I can see here. So I know it's not the best picture. So again, hello imagination. So often these sort of buildings, corrugated iron, we seem to have a brown door at the front and there's no windows, but this side of the building seems to have holes in it, which could be makeshift windows. We've got some sort of brown tiles on the roof. There is a tiny little bit of green grass around the building. So things there that I can see. Now I've already preempted that this description is not going to be celebrating that this is a modernized, lovely, beautiful building, is it? I've said weathered and worn. So my descriptive description of what I can see, I might talk about the old, rusty corrugated iron. Might talk about the broken and dilapidated tiles upon the roof. I'm going to challenge myself to describe what I can see. Now, here is an interesting one. How does this object or place maybe change due to the weather, the season, or the use? So what would a barn like this maybe be used for? It's definitely not well taken care of. It's definitely slightly neglected. So we could talk about that before. So maybe we're going to use our imaginations again. So we could say before the onset of harvest, the busiest time in the Kansas year, the building is, I'm going to keep using it, I love it, it's dormant. Dormant means like asleep. The building is dormant. It's fallen into disrepair and use. But when harvest season begins and the harvesters are fighting against the change in weather, it can become a welcome retreat from the rain and storms. Or this becomes a place where people hide during harvest season, or where it suddenly gets filled up with grain. So we could talk about a sentence. Remember, it's only one sentence. So after harvest season, this building was left to rot and fall into disrepair. Or as people stopped relying upon the wheat harvest in the area, this building fell into disrepair. So just a sentence how it might change its use. In the summer it's this. Now for us, sorry, not summer, but before harvest, after harvest. So whilst the wheat is growing, this building stands alone. It's kind of lost in a sea of wheat. After harvest, as the wheat's being cut down, the building emerges, and young people, escape to the building to get away from their parents. It becomes a place where the youngsters go, where they won't be discovered. Okay, so it could be changed in use that way. So then what are we going to describe in more detail? So sentence 4 and 5, where are we going to go? So you could describe the roof, you could describe the inside. Now again, imagination here, guys. We can't physically see inside the building because of the picture, but if you want to, you can, for sentence 5, describe another aspect of the building in more detail. Imagine you're inside. Inside the floor is covered in discarded mats and beer bottles from the last illicit party of the season. So imagination also comes into play here. So if that's your picture, you're going to pause. You're not going to come any further. You're going to start to create 5 sentences that zoom in to describe that building. Okay, the last one. Now, I know in this picture it looks like the bale of hay is at the forefront. We want our eye to go there, but I wanted to give us something that could give us more potential to write about. So we're going to do 5 sentences, if this is our picture, where we're going to zoom in and describe the change in weather in the clouds. Okay, so ominous and sinister, the clouds too can be seen from great distances. So then we're going to describe what we can see. So what are those clouds like? Now, how will the clouds change due to the change in season? So we know from this picture, because the bale's been wound up, we're talking about harvest time. So we are mid-September. The harvest has been done. The harvesters have been working against the clock, against the onslaught of autumn and the autumnal rains, maybe. So we're going to do a sentence that describes what we see. You could use a simile or metaphor to describe the clouds. The clouds themselves hang in the sky like a heavy saturated sponge. Oh, I quite like that. Ready to be squeezed. Below the clouds, the harvesters work, knowing that they have to gather the wheat before the rains come. After the rains has come, the wheat will not survive. So you've done your sentence 3. Now, sentence 4 and 5. Now, in this one, it's a bit trickier. So this was the trickiest image. So sometimes images lend themselves to really good description. So if you want, you could then describe something else. You could describe the hay bale, something else in the image. Or if you know that you could really describe those clouds in detail, if you know anything about clouds, is it a nimbus cloud? I'm trying to remember, or a Columbus cloud? You could go for that. So, guys, you have now got to write your 5 sentences that, based on your chosen picture, zoom in and describe the aspect of that picture in more detail. 5 sentences. Holcomb there as an example, if you want to nick any words or phrases. And we're looking to see a paragraph of beautiful description that zooms in on that object in more detail. All right, guys, thank you very much. So once more, for the cheap seats at the back, your second paragraph is going to be a zoomed in paragraph where you describe one element of the picture in more detail. Your sentences, there has to be 5 of them. Follow the instructions on the screen. If you want to go beyond what's there and you might end up writing more, or you want to play with the order, you can. But this is the minimum that I expect to see, that your teachers will be expecting to see. That paragraph 2 zooms in on one element of the picture and describes it in beautiful detail. You can look things up. You can find out what a grain elevator does if you're so inclined. But that's the second paragraph that we're expecting to see submitted. All right, guys, have fun, be creative, write, and enjoy it. Okay, so there's the list of what we expect to see. See you later, guys. Bye.